Hi, and welcome to this live chapter reading from Rebecca Steele, Finding the Dream by Joanne Patterson, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 2, Franklin, Tennessee. Emily poured me a welcome cup of hot coffee. It was fun to be living together. There was plenty of room in this 3-bedroom ranch house. She only had a few minutes before guests would be coming into the dining room of the Dude Ranch for breakfast. Emily had the sole responsibility for running this part of the ranch, and she did a darned good job. People enjoyed the complimentary breakfast and the trail rides that were scheduled soon after. The Dude Ranch was very popular among the tourists who visited this part of Tennessee. "Hey, Becky," Emily said. "I see the application for Miss Rodeo, Tennessee is still sitting on the counter. You've only filled out the first line with your name. Why haven't you filled out the rest of it and sent it in?" I took a sip of coffee and explained that I wasn't sure I wanted to vie for the title. There were a lot of applicants. Emily answered, "So what? You've got them all beat by a mile." I thanked my lifelong best friend for her confidence, and I told her I'd think very seriously about it. "You'd better hurry up," Emily said as she finished her coffee. "There's only one more week until the deadline." We gave each other a hug as she left. "I'll tell you my decision later, Emily, after I finish the trail rides. I always think about things while I'm riding Skipper." When I returned from a long trail ride in the great outdoors, I had decided to throw my hat into the ring for Miss Rodeo, Tennessee. There were 2 weeks until the rodeo competition, which started with an apparel and public speaking entry and finished with a horsemanship entry the following day. The 2 non-riding events were held at the Western Saloon. There was also a private 10-minute interview backstage with the panel of judges, which included the current Miss Rodeo, Tennessee, a country music star, and 2 previous rodeo competitors. The winner would be crowned at the rodeo in Franklin. I had to admit I'd always wanted the silver and gold buckle awarded as first prize. Luckily, I had some experience barrel racing, and Skipper had been trained for this event. Marty told me I had been chosen to lead the procession into the rodeo arena. What an honor. My Western wardrobe needed some help. My good friend Julie shopped for me when I needed new clothes. She found me some new duds for the apparel competition. As she held up a new shirt, I couldn't help but notice her strawberry blonde hair and blue eyes. She looked like a movie star. "I've got my boots and hat," I told her. "Just find a sharp outfit in a pretty color, like turquoise. I don't need to wear chaps." She answered, "I'm on it," and was off in a flash. She was such a good friend and kept me on track when my life got hectic. Now that I was officially a contestant, I had to decide what I wanted to talk about for the public speaking event. I chose country music. No surprise there. I received an email welcoming me to the competition and informing me that Martina McBride would be one of the judges. She was one of my favorites and lived nearby in Nashville. There was so much to do. I used Emily as a sounding board for my talk, and I felt confident it was informative and entertaining. The outfit Julie found was a pretty turquoise color and had gold trim on the blouse and cuffs. The interview could be about anything, so I would just have to wing it. Skipper and I were ready for the riding competition. The competitions went off without a hitch. I had to admit there were some beautiful young women trying out. I was nervous before the interview, but I took some deep breaths and answered honestly without hesitation. Skipper and I excelled at the riding competition as he flew around the barrels, performing exactly as he was trained to do. What a great competitor he was. 4 years earlier, Adam Mason, a state police officer from upstate New York, had just relocated to Franklin, Tennessee with his mother and father. The warm weather would be a welcome change from the brutal winters in New York. His interest in rodeos brought him to this western town near Nashville, where there were huge horse ranches interspersed with expensive homes. Adam was busy making new friends on the rodeo circuit. Dylan, a bronc rider from Wyoming, sat next to him one day in the local coffee shop. Adam was explaining he had a nickname, Chance, which had stuck with him since he was a kid. He was always trying different things and would take a chance on anything. Dylan said, "Okay, chance it is," and they shook hands. At the same time, 2 attractive women arrived and sat at the nearby counter. One of them, an attractive blonde with long hair, caught Chance's eye. "Do you know the pretty blonde at the counter?" he asked Dylan. Dylan smiled and replied, "Get in line, buddy. Her family owns a big quarter-horse ranch near here, and they also own the Hummingbird Cafe in Nashville." Chance told his new friend that he would have to remember her. "By the way, what's her name?" he asked. Dylan replied, "Becky. Her name is Becky Steele." What a glorious sunny day for the Franklin, Tennessee rodeo. There were flowers everywhere around the edges of the arena and along the procession route. All the children were given small American flags to wave. The crowd cheered wildly as I proudly carried the American flag for the first time and led the procession into the rodeo arena. I was wearing my white signature cowboy hat and my favorite red cowboy boots. Skipper, my 5-year-old sorrel quarter horse gelding, moved along gracefully, oblivious to the noise of all the fans in the stands. Skipper and I were a team. The announcer explained the workings of each event as it took place so everyone easily understood what was going on. First up were the bronc and bull riding events. The crowd cheered as cowboy after cowboy bit the dust. Next, the timed events were front and center. The calf roping, steer wrestling, and crowd favorite barrel racers brought the fans to their feet. The 2 trick buffaloes were last to perform, with Chance, a trick rodeo performer, working his magic much to the delight of the crowd. He actually stood on the back of his horse and did all his rope tricks. It was pretty impressive. All the girls loved Chance. However, it was obvious to everyone he was fond of me and tipped his hat as he rode by. After the events, there was a call for the Miss Rodeo Tennessee competitors to line up in a row inside the arena. Next, there was a short speech thanking all for entering and explaining how difficult the final decision had been. The competition was based on points, with the highest total determining the winner. I was so nervous I thought I was going to be sick. Skipper felt my nerves and started pawing the ground. Finally, the speech was over, and the top administrator of the Tennessee Rodeo Association walked out with the famous gold and silver buckle in his hand. He walked down the line shaking everyone's hand, thanking them for competing. "Will you please hurry up?" I was thinking to myself as I felt faint. He stood in front of the contestants, and as the packed arena became silent, the announcer called out, "The winner of this year's Miss Rodeo Tennessee is Miss Becky Steele." He walked over to Skipper's side, shook my hand, and handed me the buckle. He then placed the gold tiara on my white hat. I thought I was dreaming. The crowd was clapping and cheering. One by one, the other contestants rode over and shook my hand and congratulated me. My heart was beating out of my chest. Emily walked next to me, smiling. "See, Becky? I told you you'd win." I was over the moon with excitement. I never really expected to win. I thought of my mama and how proud she would be. I hoped she was watching from heaven. When everything had calmed down and most of the spectators had left, I rode Skipper over to the holding area, where I dismounted, uncinched his saddle, and gave him some hay to munch on. I hugged his neck and told him what a good boy he was, and how proud I was of him. He was the first foal from my bay mare, Misty. People were still coming over and congratulating me. It was very exciting and humbling at the same time. Bam! All of a sudden, out of nowhere, one of the wild buffaloes came tearing around the corner with Chance holding a broken lead in his hand. Skipper reared and knocked me over. I remember trying to hold on to him and then hurting my arm as I hit the ground. I could hear the siren of an ambulance far away in my head. There is always an ambulance on standby at a rodeo site, and the paramedics were at my side in a flash. When I opened my eyes the next morning, Emily was in the hospital with me. I asked her where I was. She filled me in on what had happened. Apparently, I hit my head on a rock when I fell and sprained my arm. One of the wranglers had grabbed Skipper and screamed for an ambulance. She took a minute and called Marty and Dixie, who were in Nashville working at their Hummingbird Cafe. They rushed to the hospital, but there was nothing they could do. The fact that I won the title was lost in everyone's concern about my welfare. Dixie, a very attractive woman with blonde-tipped hair, came into the room to tell me that the doctors said as far as they could tell there were no major brain injuries. Hopefully, I would be able to go home in a few hours. She said that Emily had spent the night in a chair next to my bed. She had even put her headphones on me, hoping the country music would wake me up. I asked about Skipper and wanted to be sure he was calm and taken care of. He must have been terrified to rear up like that. Emily reassured me that he was fine at home in the pasture, chilling out. The nurses limited visitors to 2 at a time, but it seemed unnecessary as I was recovering quickly. I was so glad to see my friends. I couldn't stop crying. I told Emily to go home and get some sleep. Just check on my dogs, will you? They won't understand why I'm not there. Emily hugged me and said she'd make sure my dogs were taken care of too. The doctor finally arrived and told me they had to do more tests. It looked like I had some amnesia related to the fall. He wanted Emily to be in the room when he asked me about my life. There seemed like a million questions. He started with long-term experiences when I was in my 20s. He progressed up through the years until the present. This all took a couple of hours. My answers indicated very little short-term loss, but there were significant issues into my 20s and 30s. He told us not to be too concerned because usually the memories came back after a short time. He wanted Emily to show me pictures of my past and keep track of what I remembered. I was not allowed to ride horseback or do any heavy work for a couple of weeks. He told me to make an appointment for a 2-week follow-up. You were very lucky, he told me. This could have had an entirely different outcome. Even though the memory of events when I was younger was very sporadic, he didn't seem too concerned. Dixie asked me if I remembered anything while I was unconscious. I don't really know, I replied. I had some pretty wild, colorful dreams, but don't remember anything specific other than a lot of country music and an airplane or two. Chance arrived and stood in the hallway until I motioned for him to come in. He was beyond sorry about what happened, because he was feeling responsible. He explained the rope split in two, allowing the buffalo to run free. Thank goodness you're not badly hurt, he said to me. I don't know what I'd do if you were. I gently took his hand and assured him he was just a terrible accident and I was going to be as good as new very soon. I liked Chance, but we were more friends than anything else. With the doctor's release, Marty and Dixie gathered me up and brought me home to our Hummingbird Quarter horse ranch. I cried with relief when I saw my horses and my dogs. They meant everything to me. They wanted me to stay at the main house for a few days. Emily came over from the Dude Ranch to give me a big hug. There was even a huge banner draped across the front of the main house, which read, Miss Rodeo, Tennessee lives here. Congratulations, Becky! I was so happy to be home. There were more memory tests to come. Emily found a scrapbook and asked me questions about the pictures. I remembered my parents, Rodney and Martha Steele, but I didn't remember that they had been killed in a car accident on Highway 665. I never drove on this highway and always wondered why. I cried for hours as if it had just happened. I remembered some of the people I worked with at the airport but had trouble with their names. When Emily asked me whether I remembered the Silver Eagles or traveling to the air shows, I had no idea, even though she said this was a huge part of my life. As we got closer to the present, things improved. With Emily's help, I started to remember Hilton Head Island and the beach club. I sort of remembered the house Emily and I stayed in when we were on vacation. I still have dreams of how beautiful the ocean was. The doctor was encouraged and said the memories would probably come back in bits and pieces and I should write everything down so as to not forget what I had remembered. I picked up my scrapbooks to try to jog my memory. I saw in my mother's handwriting something I said when I was a child. As soon as I could talk, I would say to anyone who would listen, horse like Trigger, dog like Lassie. My parents could never figure out how I knew about these fictional animals. Throughout my life, I would indeed come to have a horse that looked like Trigger, and many Shelties that looked like Lassie.